Welcome, everybody, to Voyager, please. It's a very special episode today. My name is Joseph.
I'm your co-host, Peter.
So, Peter, you know how the YouTube algorithm is sometimes like absolute dog water, but other times blesses you with amazing things?
I'm aware of this, yes.
Sometimes they spoil things in DS9 for you that you didn't know about.
Spoil many things,
yes.
As a matter of fact. YouTube's very good at it.
Yes. Well, YouTube sometimes, it brings something to your attention. I'm going through what the machine wants me to consume today, and I found a video on a television show I'm pretty sure I was the only person who saw any of the episodes of, called Kings, from back in like the early 2000s. Have you ever even heard of it?
No, it's that's my Covington Cross, I'm sure.
It's the most niche of niche content. It is a prestige-style drama that was on NBC in prime time that had Ian McShane basically playing King Saul from the Bible in a modern allegory. This is like niche upon niche upon niche. And I'm pretty sure only 2 people saw it. But fortunately, the other guy who saw it makes really cool YouTube videos. And for some reason, he agreed to allow us to interview him.
And who would that be, Joe?
Matt, the feral historian, thank you so much for being willing to join us today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, glad to be here.
So I wasn't kidding when I said it was just by random chance that the algorithm decided that, your content should bless my screen. And then I found, of course, you did Star Trek videos, and I was even more excited. You have been doing YouTube only, it looks like a couple of years, but you've got a pretty good growth on your channel, and your approach is, well, it's pretty well layered. You seem to have a very well-read academic way that you approach your content. Is there anything you can tell us about how you got started and why you've chosen to do this?
Well, yeah, that's a lot of facets to that. Failed academic, moved around a lot, grew up on Star Trek, and it all just kind of mashed together when I found myself with a lot of free time after relocating from the West Coast right into the center of North America, and just decided one day, you know what, I'm going to go out in the woods. I'm going to record this video about, I think it was a Fallout video, answering in response to a discussion that I had had with some people, I think a year before, figuring that 3 of them would see it. And, well, more people saw it.
Yeah, your Brotherhood of Steel stuff is very good, too. I don't know if we'll have the time to get into it, but I've watched everything you did. Your stuff is 100% in my zone.
I was unaware of the Fallout content, and that's something I really wish I would have seen prior to this, because I'm sure you got some real things to say about wasteland economy.
A few. Probably too much.
That's the power of YouTube, though, is you put content up just hoping to help or, expose a couple, and before you know it, you've got cutthroat arguments going on in your comments section. You're like, my God, where have these animals come from?
Yeah, that has been an eye-opening experience.
Oh, you read the comments too. You and Joe both have that disorder.
Yeah,
it's like we're characters in some sort of Lovecraft novel. We're cursed by the knowledge that we've chosen to consume.
Boy, howdy. You said that Star Trek was something that's kind of always been there. When did you get into it?
I don't even know. It was always in syndication as far back as I can remember. I would just, oh, hey, I like this. I don't know what this is. I mean, before I was literate, I would have to ask my dad, what is this? Oh, this is Star Trek. And I'm like, Star Trek? What was that? What does that mean? And, of course, then first movie I saw is, in the theater was Empire Strikes Back, so I'm like, that was kind of the formative impression of, some people grow up with parents that take them to the opera, or they grow up on Bible stories or something. For me, it's
science fiction,
the mainstream sci-fi, and then just got weird after that.
Not a bad place to be for pop culture. And I don't think, short of, I believe, Bruce Wayne, there's no one else I can really tell you off the top of my head whose parents took them to opera. And I don't think that really turned out too well for him. So,
I had a little bit of that. My mom took me to, opera and symphony periodically, but then my dad would let me stay up and watch Conan the Barbarian. So it was, I think a pretty balanced cultural exposure.
That's good. That's good. You have to get both major food groups.
You also mentioned the relocation, and I think that's the biggest fingerprint on your videos are these beautiful natural backgrounds that you're shooting in. Can I ask what state?
South Dakota in the Black Hills.
Oh, so you're out there.
Yeah.
Great outdoors with it. I got to ask, any good stories as far as nature not wanting to cooperate, or like visiting animals not respecting the on-air light?
One thing is, some people have asked me why in the early videos there was usually a bit of intercutting with some kind of like Peter Zeihan style walking through the woods and talking, and why I don't do that anymore. And it's because I quickly discovered that I have to pay attention to the ground, because in the winter there's ice and in the summer there's rattlesnakes.
Ooh.
And there were a couple times where I was practically on top of one before it alerted me, and it's like, okay, keep the eyes on the ground there.
A little too feral.
And extra point for bringing up Peter Zeihan style of videos, by the way. Yes, yours is much better. Nice establishing shot, get yourself in frame, get a nice background, much better.
Yeah.
I don't feel like I'm seeing up your nose. What's very arresting about your content is you have a very layered, well-read approach to the thesis that you end up deciding to deploy in these videos. So my mind immediately runs, of course, to your recent video about Enterprise, which is really the reason why I reached out to you to talk to you. Is just Peter and I struggled with that show for a couple of years, getting through all the episodes, really trying to understand its existence. And not only were you able to make a better case for its existence in 15 minutes than I think they were ever to in years, you also were able to just add in this great reference to a Trek novel from like the mid 80s that I didn't even know existed until you mentioned it. And a lot of your stuff is like that, where you just kind of pull references that I couldn't even conceive of. So how did you build this kind of like literary background in sci-fi that you're going to be able to pull upon to be able to tie these videos together?
Well, in the particular case of that Enterprise video, it was, I remember when the show premiered, watching that pilot episode and kind of thinking about it. Okay, there's this, and there's the Vulcans there being, space dad come along to raise us up right, but is this? And thinking back to the original series episode where they introduced Zefram Cochrane of Alpha Centauri, and kind of chewing that whole thing with the first contact retcons. And I started thinking, well, this is a whole thing about how 60 years of Trek is kind of a reflection of American culture. I'll probably get into that a little bit later.
Oh,
but that one, so I'm kind of churning that around. What am I going to do with this? And I kind of set it aside, I think, for about a year. And it wasn't until, I don't know, a couple months ago, I was talking to somebody who brought up that Trek novel, The Final Reflection, which I had not read prior to that either. And he mentioned that whole Comarex and Kesterex thing. And I'm like, that's it. That's the missing piece to this Enterprise thing I'm trying to figure out. So, of course, blazed through that book in a weekend.
Wow.
Well, that's amazing that you're able to have someone like be able to pull that reference for you to be able to dig into it, because it is what ties the room together. It is the rug that ties the room together. It's interesting how the point you made is present in the DNA of Enterprise, but I don't think the showrunners necessarily even understood that case themselves particularly well. So when we were going through the show, we saw they have this need to get out there into the galaxy. They feel this urge to expand and to see things and to explore and seize that sort of pioneer-like destiny. Okay. There was never a why that was very well articulated in the show, in the first two seasons at all. There's a backbeat that matches exactly what you ended up bringing up, but they weren't actually able to articulate. And I think you essentially correlated that with a conflict with the sort of late 90s optimism that by the time the early 2000s had rolled around, it felt stale, that they were still trying to make happen, that conflicted with that. And eventually Peter and I kind of just chalked it up to creative exhaustion on the part of the people who are making the show. Because at that point, Bourbon Era Trek had been on for 20 years or something like that. It was an absurdly long time. So I don't know what you might take it, having done the research, having kind of put the video together, what your take is on like what happened with how they were trying to get that show launched.
Yeah, the impression I've always had with it is that they did kind of start out thinking, well, okay, we're going to make more Star Trek, and just treating it like it was another spin-off show when the entire premise is you're dealing with a completely different set of thematic ideas. It just doesn't work. And that's, I think, why those first two seasons really just felt like they were grinding out different iterations of the same stories that they'd been doing. And they just, some of them were okay, but I can't recall any of them being great. And then it seems like they realized something wasn't quite working, and they had that season 3 with the whole Zindi arc, which on its own merits wasn't bad, but kind of came out of nowhere. And
well, it came out of 9/11, you know.
Well, yeah, I mean that. In terms of like internal Trek lore, it comes out of nowhere. But yes, it's very clearly a 9/11 kind of allegory. Except that they do have that little setup at the beginning that kind of bothered me through the whole season, where why would the Zindi test the prototype for their secret weapon on the actual target to let us know that?
Because they're good sports, man.
Yeah.
Degra was a man of honor, and he wanted us to have a fighting chance.
Well, yeah,
that's true. I mean, yeah, you could actually solve that for Degra specifically, not actually wanting to go through with terminating
that
the
could
entire
be
human
that.
race.
I'll give him the benefit of the doubt on that one. And then it's really season 4 where it felt like it was really starting to figure out what it wanted to be in the first place. And unfortunately got cut short. But
I mean, and it's not, I don't think, a surprise. You know, season 4, different showrunner, Manny Koto.
Yeah,
you know,
yep.
It was kind of like Terry Matalas came in for season 3 of Picard. Like,
yep.
New face, new energy, new approach, half as much money. It actually does help when you have less to work with and you just have to have your actors act.
Yep.
Suddenly, everybody comes to work ready to play ball.
Well, for Star Trek, anyways, your video on Enterprise that we've been discussing here really solidified a lot of thoughts that I had in terms of what Enterprise could have been if the showrunners could have sat down, if Berman and Braga could have sat down and said, what's the deep story to tell here? What's the real inspiration of humanity? And instead, they wanted something that was going to make UPN happy with decontamination gel into Paul and revealing outfits and trying to go after this UPN young adult audience. And I really think that they shot themselves in the foot, that no consideration whatsoever seemed to be given at, like, let's look at a lot of Star Trek's about humanity looking at outside alien situations. And I think Enterprise should have been Star Trek looking at humanity under that microscope. And, you know, it's a dead horse and I'm happy to beat it more. You've gotten some really good shots in the complete disaster of the timeline. I call myself a World War III doubter or denier.
Yeah, truther. Yeah.
Because it's this crystallizing moment that makes Star Trek a post-apocalyptic success story, right?
Yeah.
And it's had so much attention called to it specifically through Next Generation, starting with Encounter at Farpoint. And yet they keep moving the goalposts on when this thing happened, the exact circumstances where the augments fit in and all this other stuff. So, you know, going in and seeing the early days of Starfleet and John Archer and Admiral Forrest wearing essentially a suit and tie. And it's like, so people went from being post-apocalyptic, nuclear, mutant, cocaine junkies over to now the Vulcans are there in the launch room and the Vulcans have lanyards. Earth has gotten its economy back on track to a degree that we've gone back to mass producing lanyards and we're making the aliens wear them.
Where did all these bureaucrats come from?
Yeah, I'm glad they were able to survive the post-apocalyptic horrors of the pit, you know, these other Fallout death camps and fucking raiders and stuff. But you know, they ramrodded this story of, okay, well, what if Earth just went through a little bit of turbulence and now we're pushing into this sexy future and it's going to be a race of who banks to Paul first. Is going to be Archer or Trip, instead of the really important stories, which they did get to in season 4. And yeah, we had a different showrunner, and yeah, there are budgetary constraints and other stuff, but I feel like they had these barn burner stories that they were waiting to get to in like season 5, 6, 7, and now that's not on the table. We got to push them all out in season 4. The most important of which I think was
Terra Prime.
Terra Prime. That was the Peter Weller RoboCop episode. And this very important story of the two populations of Earth. And one was a population that was content to grow as far as Earth and the Sol system was ready to allow, and not push the boundaries. Yeah, you got the Vulcans there or whatever, but like, let's take advantage of this utopia that we've created from the ashes of this nuclear hellscape. And then you got these Starfleet jerks that are just like, let's tell everybody where we're at and maybe have a few fights along our way. Hey, here's like an insectoid race that's just hollowing people out and drinking their juices. Yeah, there's home. We're the best ship possible, and all the other ships suck. So feel free. We're a buffet waiting. And how do these two camps reconcile what the future of humanity and Earth is going to be? I could have taken a whole season of that.
Well, when they announced Enterprise, I mean, when I first saw a trailer on TV for it, the thing I was looking forward to was the Earth versus Romulus war. It's like, how are they going to handle this? Because this is going to be a pivotal thing in this era. And then all through season 1, it's, why isn't it happening? Why aren't we fighting Romulans yet? This should be the cliffhanger at the end of the season. Something with the Romulans, a war's coming. No? Okay. Well, maybe season 2. No.
Or as you call it, season poo.
Yeah. Season 2 at least introduced the idea of the Romulans.
Yeah.
Like there was the minefield episode and everything.
Yeah.
Like,
which is one
out there.
Oh, are they going to do it? No.
I mean, I think the lore is that that was their intention for season 5 was to go down that road.
Which seemed like what they were finally building toward.
There was some good tread on those tires in season 4 of like, the story Enterprise did right, and I'd love your take on this. I think is, why did humans matter in the galaxy? Like, why are they the first citizens of the Federation? They clearly are, right? Like they're in charge, really, spiritually and physically. Well, and everyone seems okay with that. So how did that happen, right? These are the good dudes that were bombing themselves to oblivion 80 years before they like rolled up in their new space hoopty. Like, hey guys, what's up?
It's because we're really good at it and everybody else is scared.
And they start to finally figure out a way to tell that story. Like, why not the Vulcans? Because the Vulcans feel a little incomplete, because they're a little stagnant, because they're a little too controlling. They've got problems. Andorians, they're too busy fighting everybody. Don't trust anybody. Don't have anyone they can talk to. The Tellarites, they just kind of are assholes. Like, they can't relate to anybody. And who can get along with all of them? Humans, right? And it's actually the most Star Trek I feel like the show got is when, like, humans suddenly had a purpose.
Yeah, that was really, I thought, one of the things where the show shows some really great potential, and it's really unfortunate that it didn't get that 5th season. I think that's really when it would have come together if they hadn't been forced to wrap everything up in 3 episodes at the end of season 4 and then just kind of can it. But it's like almost there.
You know, it's them being forced to wrap things up, I think is a guilt that is fairly shouldered on the executive design teams on that. Like, you can't survive that season 2, and the fact they got season 3, let alone 4, was really crazy for as hard as they kind of crashed it. Like, and that's a byline through a lot of the late 80s, early 90s Trek. Mm-hmm. Is, you know, in modern TV now, if you're not strong several seasons or several episodes into the season 1, you're going to fail. So Next Gen getting the mileage it did off some real trash episodes. Time capsules.
What's happened now? Syndication was a much kinder format for having dog water episodes. You're just like, you know, they're just buying it, right? Like, that's where the revenue's coming from. Yeah. So, you know, they all sell the same. So, in terms of Trek, you got a favorite? You got a favorite show?
Probably DS9.
Okay. All right, there you go, Peter. Same answer for everybody.
It's like, I know it's kind of like the basic Trek Bro answer, but it's like, if I was going to sit down and rewatch an entire Trek series now, it's DS9.
Peter's new to it for our present review structure, so he's
Yeah.
experiencing it for the first time.
Ah.
Our entire listener base is vicariously living through the fact that somehow the one person who loves Star Trek who never watched a DS9 is him.
I came to myself from the future. It wasn't with, advice to invest in Google or Apple or buy all the Bitcoin possible. It was, hey, you know what? It's okay. Don't watch Deep Space Nine now. Wait until it's 2025.
Yeah, just
You'll
save
get better mileage off your podcast. Trust me.
Yes. Save it for the 2020s because you're going to want some Trek worth watching.
Boy, howdy.
Yeah, I watched Section 31 on Friday. Matt, I know we've just met, but I want to implore you never to do that.
Yeah, I downloaded a bootleg of it, and it's sitting there for some night when I want something that is just absolute trash.
Oh, one of those
Good
nights where you
news.
Because every once in a while, need to get some cheap scotch out and put something that's just complete garbage on.
you eat something that doesn't sit quite right, and you're like, how am I going to throw this back up? I know. Let me grab some Kurtzman trick.
I wanted to ask another couple questions about your approach to your content on YouTube. You kind of you organically grew from the sound of it. But you had a real plan. Like all of your content going all the way back is very well structured around what I would call the mid-length video essay, and it's very much premise, support for the premise, conclusion, kind of like an academic argument. And I presume that's not. I'm not over interpreting what you're doing.
It wasn't all that deliberate. I think that just comes from several years of academic training of like, okay, if I'm going to get up here and say something, I have to have a point. It doesn't necessarily have to be a good one. It just has to be a point. Like there is a thesis here.
See, I was taking it more, and this harkens back to what you said the initial video was, which is arguing on the internet and doing it well and making sure you're covering all of your bases. So,
which of course, every single time I miss something, and people in the comments are sure to tell me about it 15 times.
Oh yeah. I just learned to thank them. Boy, I really appreciate you had the time. Like, I have a life, so it's really nice that you don't. Watching Enterprise, we really had a bone to pick with Scott Bakula. That man struggled to play Archer in a way that came off as very petulant and indignant rather than, an intrepid explorer and diplomat who is the best person to lead the only real star ship that their Earth owns. And I'm curious as to your take. Like, was that his fault? Or do you think like a right actor could have pulled that character off? Or what went wrong there? Because he really didn't become like who he was supposed to be until like the middle of season 3.
Yeah, the way that I kind of interpreted that character, and I remember having discussions with people at the time, and there was this big argument where someone was telling me that, no, Archer sucks because he's boring and he's lame and he should be more like Kirk because it's these early days of Starfleet and you need somebody that's like adventurous kind of swashbuckling figure that's out there. And somebody else is like, well, no, he should be more like Picard, this settled, like very rational, very calm. And this guy just seems like he's a little bit out of his element. And I'm like, but he's a political appointee. He's picked for this position because his father worked on the program. He is acceptable to everybody that was involved in the program. There's the symbolic element of this is the first ship. He's the guy that should be seen to be taking the ship out. It's just like the narrative aspects of it being sold to the human public is the reason you put this guy in there. And thinking of it in that way, I kind of thought it worked that he didn't seem to quite fit into the role because he was just like, this is a guy that really should have been in some administrative position within Starfleet overseeing development or something, but he's kind of pushed into this frontline half military but also half public relations role. And there's this kind of tension there because he doesn't quite know how to do that.
Yeah, political appointee is that rings in my ears because I think Peter called him a Nepo baby. bringing up the same thing at one point.
Yeah.
But yeah, like that he was picked not for his skills, but because he was the person that had to be seen doing it.
Yeah.
Kind of does justify why he's shitty at it.
Which is great headcanon.
Yeah.
I need to see that on the screen and there to be a conversation with Trip, some sort of a self-doubt or something to acknowledge it. And instead, the writers and the design team pay no attention to it. And you get this petulant man-child bitch who just all you know about him is he hates Vulcans. And he's quick to let, T'Pol know that. And like Joe said, I mean, yeah, during the Xindi War, he really finds his footing and you start getting a real guy out of there. But again, man, that's stuff that is going to cost you your TV show. And you can't have your male lead be this big crybaby. And I feel bad that Scott Bakula was dealing with those scripts because I don't think it was his spin he put on the ball, but that's what the audience got at the end.
It's kind of a similar thing to what they had to deal with in Voyager, where in some of those early episodes they had Janeway like, let's have her playing a governess on the holodeck and all this. And we're like, no, we want more Ellen Ripley, Sarah Connor kind of Captain Janeway. Give us that. And then finally they had that episode with the giant viruses and she's running around with a phaser rifle. And it's like, okay, this is better. And it's just, sometimes it takes them a little while to figure out what they want to do. And if everybody's really lucky, they figure it out in that first season.
They did Janeway so dirty that I don't think there's any way to really objectively look at Voyager and not see her as like the worst.
And it's not Kate Mulgrew's fault.
No, not at all.
So the first show that Peter and I did as part of our podcast was Voyager. We started with that because it was just felt like this unloved child of the Czech universe. It got 7 seasons, but had like no real cultural penetration.
Yeah.
We did find out there's a subset of people who Voyager is their shit. And we found them. It was very interesting to encounter them and like understand why.
No,
but yeah, it was. And it was a lot more women, to be honest with you, than we had ever thought, which made more sense when you really took a step back to say, well, of course, right? First female captain's probably going to attract people. The show had Jerry Taylor as a showrunner, main writer, and then showrunner kind of like in its early to mid seasons. And it was probably a little bit more of a delicate touch around centering the women in the stories in a way that probably attracted more audience that way. Not without like making it political, but just it was subtle. It was actually pretty well handled for the most part. But what wasn't was that the show's premise forced them to write Janeway like a dipshit so many goddamn times that it became hard to take her character seriously. And the piece de la resistance is with the Borg and species 8472. The irredeemable choice on the part of Catherine Janeway to say, I'm not going to genocide our greatest enemies in the galaxy because Kess thinks that the Mewtwo people are a little too mean. And so we're gonna go ahead and help out the genocidal space robots take care of that. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you, woman? What are you doing?
Yeah, it was hard to roll with that.
It's like everyone in the Gamma Quadrant or in the Delta Quadrant should have been out for blood for her. Like from that point forward, like who is this bitch?
Well, she's an admiral now, so history's written by the victors, I guess.
There was one episode where that did actually happen. Arcturus was right with the slipstream drive ship, but it should have been a lot more of that. And it's interesting. Voyager was kind of the predecessor to Enterprise, and on the UPN kind of had the same problem where it was like the shift from going to syndication to going to network television. You think that had an impact on why those shows ended up failing? Because that's the impression that we were ended up being left with.
I never really thought about that, but that does seem like a distinct possibility that I'd have to kind of dig into the studio politics of the time and what was going on and all that, because it's almost a conscious choice at this point to kind of look at shows or books or whatever it is I'm looking at. It just like, I'm going to look at the work itself. I don't want to know what the author's politics are. I don't want to know all the behind the scenes nonsense that was going on. I want to be able to judge this thing on its own merits. And unfortunately, a few things have been completely ruined for me on those fronts. Oh, well.
Yeah, we all have our favorite artists that turned out to be douchebags. It's unfortunate.
You start talking about Voyager, the tail end of DS9. Ronald Moore, did you get into Battlestar Galactica at all?
I did. I think I had the same experience as a lot of people where it's like, oh, they're making a mini series of Battlestar Galactica. This is interesting. Oh, this was actually pretty good. Oh, they're going to make a show out of this. Okay, cool. And then for a while, thinking, yeah, this show's pretty good. And then, yeah, this show used to be better. This show hurts.
Yeah, the miniseries was good. The first,
Yeah.
I would say, the first season and a half, technically. First season and the first half of the second season, right up through the Pegasus stuff.
Yeah, I thought the New Caprica storyline was pretty good too, for the most part.
I think it was a little too current day because it was
A
all
little
Iraq
bit.
insurgency stuff.
Yeah.
You know, was
But-
the backbeat for that.
Yeah, definitely. But I thought they, as its own little storyline, and they kept it brief enough that it didn't really go on so long that it started to drag. It was like, what, 4 episodes, I think?
Yeah. It was 3 or 4 episodes at the beginning of the season 3.
Yeah.
And you did have like eye patch wearing Colonel Ty talking about like suicide bombers while smoking a cigarette. It was poetry at times. So I'm not going to deny it. But yeah, like Ron Moore, he made his bones on DS9 and doing Trek, and then, you know, decided he would do the meme and have his own show with blackjack and hookers rather than continue to work on Voyager. He would just do a version of Voyager he thought was cool. and I saw you did your episode about how, or you did your video about Admiral Kane and how they changed the approach to Admiral Kane from the sort of gallant hero type, very archetypal late 70s gallant hero type, to your blood-soaked realpolitik military despot in Battlestar Galactica. I really enjoyed that. What's the good version? What's the good ending to like taking that? Like, so let's call that the peak, right? It was kind of like right when Battlestar Galactica maybe started to lose its footing. Where does that show go from there? Do you think that is the good ending?
Yeah, that's one I haven't really war gamed out. Well, one thing I think could have come out of that would have been interesting is, regardless of what happened in that power struggle between Kane and Adama, like, somehow they have to get rid of Kane, but it would be nice if it was something a little better. But I'd like to see some version of it where they have to then face head on that this whole facade that they've had going, that, well, we're the 12 colonies and we have a quorum that's governing things and we have a president. And it's like, no, you don't. You're not even a fleet. You're a bunch of ships scattered around, and the biggest ship with the most guns leads the fleet, and whoever can get enough supporters commands that ship. That's what you're dealing with. It's like Adama touched on it a little bit later on with that whole thing about how we're not a civilization, we're a gang.
Yeah,
but I'd kind of like
on the run.
Yeah, I'd like to have seen that more in the forefront in the second half of the series.
No, it's like, I think the subtitle of what you just said is Tom Zarek was right.
Yeah,
like, he was the one pointing out in those early episodes, like the Armistice Day or whatever, when they were assembling the government, of like, this is all made up. This is all bullshit. This guy who's the gardener, he's just why is he gardening? What is the purpose of this? Get your heads around just this, guys. What's wrong with you?
Yeah,
and yeah, like eventually the show did go in that direction, but I felt like it was too lost by then. By the time it started to figure out the more interesting elements of its internal politics, because it got way into its own asshole when it came to the whole spirituality and the cycles repeating themselves and all of that. The show got bogged down so awful in that I think most people lost interest for a reason.
Yeah, and I think Zarek he took it the first step there, and then the show kind of stopped at that, where it was at that like, you know, when you know somebody in college that has just discovered the anarchist philosophers and they start tearing down the ideas about how all of the social structures are just made up bullshit. And then it's like, okay, you're right. What do we do about it? What do we replace this big pile of nonsense with? And if Zarek would have had an answer, That could have been really interesting. Of
And there was like a
course,
spot for maybe like a competing ideology when he kind
yeah.
of got basically accepted as a consequence of him, you know, being a real one against the Cylons on New Caprica and
Yeah.
became vice president. And they just kind of shelved him. They just shelved him as a character until they decided to do the coup plot line, and that was that.
Yes, which was a huge waste of potential.
So to return to Trek briefly, obviously your economics video it's probably one of the bigger ones on your channel. Long, very well researched. You bring up a lot of the Trekonomics stuff. You even set out a pretty good case for how you could theoretically like see a version of the Trek economy working in real life with kind of like that UBI credit as a consequence of crypto mining and all of that. But I had a specific question for you. So my take on what you said about kind of like the Federation UBI just being larger than any individual citizen could really ever spend, and therefore their personal resources are limitless, but their resources relative to the galaxy are still infinitesimal, so it can still work. Would that imply that the Federation's technological advancement is just way higher than everyone else's because other civilizations still have currency? They still have to like represent wealth in a material way, because like they don't have replicators the same way, they don't have energy production the same way, and like Federation's just kind of like the US, they're just like an order of magnitude ahead of everyone, so it's just they play by different rules.
Possibly. I mean, I'm sure there'd be some cultural factors that would come in too. Um, I would think that might. There's probably could have been some great Enterprise episodes built around this. That experience of having gone through this, nearly civilization-ending conflict that kind of cleared the slate for
Right.
humanity to go to the stars could very well be this cultural touchstone that allows them to have this different sort of social organization, so that when you get to this, everybody calls it post-scarcity. It isn't technically, but in practical terms for the individual, it is. To like when you get to that point, to be able to say, well, we don't need to borrow all these old forms going back hundreds of years and just try to reconstruct them. We can build the cultural and social structures alongside the new production structures. I'm going to start sounding like a Marxist in a minute if I keep going with this. Whereas if you look at, say, the Ferengi is a great example, if they didn't have those wars, which, according to Quark, they didn't, then they wouldn't have anything forcing them to get rid of these socioeconomic systems. So they would just like, we're still going to use money. It's just we have more, which means we can use it to buy more stuff and get even richer.
And so it's just you don't have World War III, so they just continued using currency. And
they don't need to change anything because nothing brought them right to the edge of extinction. They're just like, hey, it works well enough. Why change it? We'll keep going.
When you're saying that the Federation isn't truly post-scarcity at top level, you're referring to the fact they can't just replicate galaxy classes. There's still a logistics process, and there's still resource management that has to go into building these capital level assets.
Yeah, it's not magic. It's just very efficient, high orders of magnitude energy usage that you can put into your productive capacity, but you still have to acquire it, and you still have to get resource A to place B to make good C. There's a process involved, and people have to put in some effort to it.
It's really one of the hard things about Star Trek when you're sitting here splitting hairs on it as a hobby, as Joe and I do, is that, it's this vehicle to tell fantastic stories out in outer space about starships and these humanitarian ideals and, this other great fantasy stuff. But then there's Earth, and there's the Federation, and there's the bureaucracy. And, it's hard for these writers that are there to tell the one story to have it within them to tell the support and the logistics and really flesh this stuff out. Because if you don't even have the timeline make sense as to when your war is and where these hardships are, like, how can you expect these writers to give a clear view of what the economy looks like on Earth, what life as a Federation citizen when you've got access to holodecks and replicators, like the drive to go out to the stars. And a lot of the nitty gritty, where you hold up the mirror or the magnifying glass of like common sense. It's like, man, this stuff just is not holding up at all here. Why can't we get these stories? And one of the many, I think, kicks to the pants that Picard season 1 gave us was like, hey, here's a Star Trek story that's mostly based on Earth. Like, we're going to start getting these answers. Like, what drives people to Starfleet service? God, and I'm even thinking about it starts getting me mad. Like Raffi shitting on Picard for having Chateau Picard and like class inequality and all this other stuff. And they really had the opportunity to put some real thought in and start fleshing these ideas out. And they completely shit the bed. Did you watch any Orville?
Yes.
I thought they did a great job, like really starting to color in between the lines. Starfleet service or Union service or whatever. It gets you prestige, and prestige is the real currency. And, if you're an important guy, you get a apartment with a better view. And this is how we advance ourselves as a culture. But there's also personal benefit that comes with these acts. And I think that ties in great with your Starship Troopers video, which is something I had never really considered, comparing those two organizations together and just how many similarities there really were.
Yeah, I thought that was one of the things that really stood out to me early on with the Orville is that idea of like reputation and social capital being much more important to the economic structure than they are now. Because today, if you don't have that stuff, but you have money, it doesn't matter. But if you have some kind of like non-currency based system, then it becomes much more important.
I think it was your video that talked about like you jump into communism where everybody has to work and it's like guys' personality starts mattering. It's not just
it would be interesting to land a check. Yeah. And I think that the reputation as the true currency, as a marginal currency too, is like thinking about the Orville and thinking about like no one's starving if they decide not to engage in things that allow them to build prestige. But it is the difference that allows that natural tendency of humans to have a pecking order and have to have some way to differentiate themselves and some way to rise above each other and compete, but controlled in a way that manages to force that impulse forward rather than against each other.
Yeah.
Like capitalism does that pretty well, all things considered, but what does the ideal version of this look like? If we could just write it the way we wanted it to be.
Yeah, I think if we could really get more people on board with this idea that getting rid of inequality isn't actually desirable, we just need to figure out ways to make inequality mostly harmless. And then we could just like channel that drive where it's like, because everybody wants to be better than that other guy.
Right. Someone wants to win at things.
We don't
whatever
want to
it
get rid
is.
of that.
Yeah. It's like capitalism is, in its present iteration is a good thing because there's some people who want to win at it. And when those people win at it, it tends to benefit everybody else. Yeah. Maybe not as much as they'd like, maybe not in ways that everyone would personally choose. But overall, if you zoom it all the way out and you look at the trend line, like, yes, people winning at capitalism leads to better outcomes down the line. So okay, let's take that in a way that makes it so that the stakes are much lower. And the line's always just going up anyway, and people can now compete against each other in a way that makes humanity better more generally and more positively than some of the more controversial things that might happen when you let people go wild and out.
Yeah, because I mean, if you're worst case scenario, you fail, you still have a place to live, you still have food to eat. It's like, well, you know, I can afford to take some stupid risk. I'll try this thing, see if it works. Oh, it didn't. I lost everything on it. Oh, well, I guess I go back to my little apartment and have a frozen pizza and come up with the next crazy idea because I'm not going to starve to death on the street. It's one of these days. I like to think I'm going to figure out exactly how to do that. But if I ever do, it's probably meaning that I've completly crossed over into crazy land and nobody should listen to me. So.
You already said failed academic. So it's
it's already there.
I do appreciate you, but kind of butting up against something that I've always personally agreed with, and that is Star Trek is not communist.
Yes.
It is not. People who think it is are wrong. There's nothing communist about it. The lack of currency and the lack of capitalism is not the presence of communism. And I don't know what is it. Just level one thinking? Is that just people draw that conclusion and they just don't get off it? That they tend to think that?
It's probably partly that, and then there's just Star Trek is utopian. I like that future. I'm going to claim it. Well, okay, you have to show me the work, though. You can't just say this thing I like is that thing that I also like, so they're the same thing. Well, no, not really. I mean, every time anybody's tried this communism thing, it has not looked like Star Trek.
No. You got a personal favorite secret Star Trek episode? Like, there's the big favorites everyone says. You got like a deep cut of like, this is the shit I like.
I can't remember the name of this one. It's a Voyager episode.
Oh, hold on. We're here for you. Come on.
Oh, yeah. All right.
It's the one where the doctor's emitter gets left behind, and it starts with like this almost mirror universe version of Janeway.
Living Witness.
Yes, that's the one.
That's probably top 5 material. Yeah. Absolutely.
What's your draw on that one?
I'm planning to do a video about that episode one of these days. It's kind of got the outline.
Deserves it, man. It's a great one.
It is a great one.
But it's basically that how much of accepted history is just narrative more than strictly evidence-based, and how you can find things in the record that alter and every once in a while completely upend your perception of what the past was. And the way people react to that tells a lot to me about how serious they are about the pursuit of history. Because some people, it's just like, well, no, this is fake. You're misinterpreting this. This is, I'm not going to change my model. Get this thing out of here, or I'm going to find a way to marginalize it so I can fit it in the least impactful way possible. And that's kind of how the museum curator in that episode initially reacts, but then he has that more honest reaction of like, okay, holy shit, this is real. I have to come to terms with this. I've believed a bunch of things that are not true. And that moment when, I think every academic should experience this at least once, where you start out with a thesis and you go in there and your research shows that you were completely full of shit, and you just have to sit there and like, okay.
Who am I as a person?
I've been working on this. I've been working on this paper for 2 months. It's due in 3 weeks.
Wow,
everything I thought I was going to find is wrong. What do I do? And it's like, you really grow having to deal with that.
I completely see why that you zeroed in on that one. And that particular element to it is probably resonates all the way down the line with the story. Obviously, they frame it a really fun way, doing basically a pseudo mirror universe thing.
Of course, yeah.
Did you have a moment like that academically?
Yeah. It was. It wasn't quite that severe. It wasn't like my entire field of research is crap, but it was very early on, before I had really decided on what I was going to focus on. I started doing some work on the American colonies during the Protectorate era, where the king's gone, Cromwell's in charge, and England's a republic, and well, what's going on in these colonies? And I kind of went into it with this thought that, well, they're going to be kind of looked at as like they're not going to get as much attention as they did before because there's so much stuff going on in the mother country, and that could kind of, in some very small way, lay a cultural foundation for what would later lead to the American Revolution, this independent spirit, and how you could be able to trace this cultural line through. And I started doing some research on it, and no, not at all. It was like pretty much what happened is a couple colonies found out that, oh, it's a republic now. Well, okay, we have royal charters, so they're null and void now. We're just going to run things our own way. So Cromwell sent the Royal Navy out, and they smacked down Barbados, and they forced one of the Carolinas to reinstate their governor, and that was the end of it. It was just like, quash that
new
right
boss,
off.
the same as the old boss. You're sticking to the same rules. Yeah. None of this independent spirit shit.
Yeah, it's like, oh, okay, well, that didn't really bear out, did it? So, next.
Your point about Living Witness, the humiliation that comes with having a set of priors that are false and having to actually look into the void of that humiliation is something that people just can't do. And it's large and small. You can see it every day on Twitter if you really want to, right? Every day. And that was a great way to frame that story in a Star Trek way, particularly using the Doctor as the method of doing so.
Yeah.
Because he could just really be just the character you knew, and now in an entirely different foreign environment.
Great stakes in that episode too, because there was a lot of identity and a lot of victimization tied into it, the way the entire society ran. Great kind of like step back and highlight on so many of these Star Trek episodes where the hero ship shows up, they flex nuts, they slap a new paint on whatever the problem was, and then they fly away never to be seen again. And it's like, okay, well, what do all these people that just had their worlds rocked, like, what do you do with that tomorrow? And go, well, that just happened and they're gone now. And apparently I'm a space Nazi Hitler. I didn't know that. I'm sorry, everybody. I'm going to throw away all my jackboots and high collar shirts. How are we going to come together as a people? What impact happens? Why is the Prime Directive so important? And then also all the fun stuff as far as, the warship Voyager goes. And I'll tell you, a lot of the things they did in The Living Witness, it's like, man, like warship Captain Janeway had the right idea. Like, look at all these aliens they brought with them to supplement their crew. Like, why hasn't look, there's guys on the bridge that have guns. So when the bad people transport on, they're shooting before the bad guys are shooting. Look, she put Carrie Kim in check. I love this lady. Give me more of her.
She's got those gloves that looks like she chokes people for fun.
Yeah.
Like, we're doing it.
Love it.
Voyager did have a lot of fun moments.
Yeah. Yeah, there were definitely some good episodes. Several years ago, my wife and I watched the whole series through, and I liked it a lot more on the second viewing than I did the first time through.
Our overall take was that season 5 was probably the best because it was kind of when things got real dark.
Yeah.
Everybody had like a real bad time at different times. Everyone had their time in the barrel, I think, as we called it. Like, had their like moment crisis of faith. We actually like season 7 too. Like, the show wrapped up well.
Yeah.
Aside from the last episode, which just kind of ends. Like, everyone gets like their storyline resolved as you get to the finale in a way that's very satisfying.
What'd your wife think of the Voyager watch through? I mean, obviously she tolerated it enough to get to the end.
Yeah, it was the same kind of reaction, liking it more the second time through, because we had both kind of looked at Voyager as like the bastard child of Trek. That
love stepchild of the Star Trek universe. 7 seasons and no one knows why.
Yeah, just like, this actually wasn't that bad. It was.
It when it's bad, it is very bad.
Yes, that's true.
We call it season sucks. And season 6 is just riven with terrible episodes.
The byline for Voyager was just squandered potential.
Yeah.
And they had an infinite bank account that they could have written so many great stories. And the fact that just right out of the gate, they start squandering the potential on the Maquis Starfleet divide and whitewash all of that. And it's like, God, man, there's so much potential here. What are you doing?
They cash out Seska way too early. Like,
what are your Maquis thoughts?
In terms of Voyager, I would really like to have seen that become more of a hybridized kind of crew instead of the Maquis personnel just being integrated into basically Starfleet. It's just like, okay, you're part of our crew now. It would have been much more interesting if there had been some pushback. It's like, well, no, you're kind of like that Galactica thing we were talking about earlier. It's like, no, you're not part of Starfleet anymore. You're just this one ship that's out here, and you need to start coming to grips with that. And to have more of a, obviously not an equal blending because there's far fewer Maquis crew members, but the relationship with Janeway and Chakotay could have been much more like a political sort of thing where it's not quite co-captains, but it's like bones have to be thrown to both factions in order to get any major decisions made, because there's always this tension there.
Because a third of the crew are terrorists. And
Yeah.
you have to kind of placate them a little bit. You can't
Yeah,
act like their opinions don't matter.
Yeah. Have
And
to
then
be some deals.
And then they kind of threw that in the garbage entirely by the time they got to the Equinox episodes, which was, kind of them saying, no, really, Voyager is like the pure Starfleet vessel and they have all along, and it would have been wrong to do anything else. Janeway like on her high horse about how she never bent the rules. I'm like, bitch, no, I watched 6 seasons of you. Shut the fuck up. Absolutely not correct. Tell that to the Borg.
Well, yeah, but she writes the log, so.
Well, Matt, we have really appreciated taking your time this evening. Thank you so much for being willing to talk to us.
Oh yeah, good time.
Please, do you have a way that you monetize your content that you want to throw out there in case the dozens of people who listen to this might want to give you a few bucks?
Well, there is a Feral Historian Patreon page, and otherwise, just hop on over to YouTube and let the ad play, because that's actually got to the point now where I have to start paying attention to the revenue for tax purposes.
Anybody who's going in fresh to your content, where do you think the best places to start are? What are your personal favorite videos?
The one that I have up on kind of the main page now is the, hey, new guy, check this out, is the one on the Things to Come H.G. Wells film, which may not be everybody's thing. If not that, I would say the Enterprise video would be a good way to jump into. Those two are both pretty recent. There's some older Trek stuff, but the audio on some of those old ones is pretty bad.
I feel you on that one, man.
I'm always going to be a sucker for the Kings episode.
Oh.
I'm just I would call it a forgotten favorite if anyone had ever watched it at all.
It's just they never knew.
In 2006, for some reason, everyone wanted to be HBO, and it was a great time to be alive, and it didn't last long.
The thing I thought was odd with Kings is I was trying to find the DVDs for it so I could just use clips that were actually decent quality. And when I was looking, I couldn't find them anywhere. So I bootlegged it. And so, some of them have the little channel marker up in the corner.
Oh, yeah.
And then about 2 weeks after I put that video up, there it is on Amazon. DVD set, $10. So I grabbed that. And now every once in a while, somebody will tell me that they're looking for the series and they can't find it. So I don't know what was going on with that. If they just found a few of them in the back of a warehouse or something, it's like, somebody will buy this. Or like, what was going on?
It sounds like some shit lost in the back of a warehouse if I ever saw. Like, what is this? Who cares? But Sebastian Stan was in it. That's basically the only notable thing about it.
So if I ever revisit Kings, there will be much higher quality clips.
All right. Well, thank you again so much, Matt. And if you are somebody who's never watched Feral Historian on YouTube, you're missing out. Get on it. It is some of the best stuff you'll see out there in terms of very interesting essays on sci-fi topics. And again, Matt, I literally emailed you out of the blue, and you said yes. So I can't thank you enough for that.
Hey, good time. And I've got a little bit of scotch left here, so
perfect time. I have left.